school district and our region have attracted you and brought you here to Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida?
All righty. First off, my name is Mike Dunsmore. Right now I'm in Wayne County school system. It's halfway between Raleigh, North Carolina and Wilmington, North Carolina on the coast. I've been in that role for 3 years. Prior to that, I was in Terrell County, which is on the western side of the Albemarle Sound, which is the Outer Banks, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Originally, I'm from South Central Pennsylvania. I'm the son of 2 educators. My father's 83, retired after 37 years at the same public high school that I graduated from, the same public high school my wife graduated from. We met in 11th grade, and her father taught me in algebra and geometry when I was in high school. All 3 of our boys are graduates of that same high school. We just decided, having grown up small town folks, and as I progressed through my career, we wanted to move. We wanted to head south, and it was at the time my parents were in Kitty Hawk, and my mom said, "Hey, they need a superintendent here. Why don't you apply?" And so I haven't looked back. I started out in a non-traditional role. If you read my background, both my parents being teachers in 1979, my dad and I have had this conversation that back then teachers were very undervalued. It wasn't a real good time to go into education. There wasn't a lot of jobs. I went into probation and parole when I was an intensive juvenile probation officer. I was a wrestler in high school. I wrestled in college. My daddy was my high school wrestling coach, and when I came back, I was his assistant and ultimately replaced him as the head coach. But I had an opportunity, and it was kind of the framework or the groundwork of where we are with SROs now in Pennsylvania. They started bringing probation officers into the school. We weren't armed, we had no arresting authorities, but it was more of a counselor and working with our clientele that were in the schools. From that, I realized that education was where I wanted to be. Having worked out in the community with a lot of kids that had a lot of struggles and troubles, it had an impact on me, and I felt it was best to be in the educational environment where I could hopefully help them. I went back and got a degree in guidance and counseling, was doing that, was coaching. We had a sudden retirement in a life skills position. They asked me to go in and teach middle school life skills. But I had to go and get my teaching certificate, which I did, and I stayed in that role for about eight and a half years. Probably the best job I've ever had. I mean, I just had a ball with those kids. So I transitioned into administration. My last job in Pennsylvania was in Palmyra, which is Hershey, Pennsylvania. So where they made the chocolate, that's where I was. I was finishing up my doctoral work at the time, and my superintendent then, part of the reason I applied at North Carolina, other than they probably pay for a trip for me to go see mom and dad, he said, "Look, you're in line, you can be a superintendent here, but you need to go off somewhere and develop your own style." That was great advice. I spent 6 years at Terrell County, loved it. Just to give you a context, the day I left there, I had 690 students. It was the smallest school system in the state of North Carolina. I had 1 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high school. And people chuckle, but I wore every hat. I had no assistant superintendent. I only had 2 principals. So I basically did it all, and it was just fantastic. I knew every student's name, every staff's name. It was a great place, but I wanted a challenge. And the reason I went to Wayne County was very similar to Terrell. It's a high poverty county. It's a very diverse county, and it has a lot of need. And I'm going to jump a little. The reason I'm here, Duval County is very, very similar to Wayne County, just bigger. We have an Air Force base, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in my county. It's the largest Air Force base for fighter jets in the United States. So any of our fighter pilots or anything that you're reading over in the conflicts we're in, if the fighter jets are involved, they're taken off from my backyard. So we deal a lot with those students and a lot of federal monies. The southern half of my county is very agricultural driven. If any of you like pickles and know Mount Olive pickles, they're in my county. So we have a high migrant population, a high English language learner population, and we deal with a lot of issues there. Goldsboro is our county seat. Not obviously as big as Jacksonville, a very populated, smaller city, but high poverty, very, very high needs. When the county and the city merged a number of years ago, about 17 years ago, it was flourishing. And now the numbers have dwindled. We got a lot of buildings. There was a lot of people that moved out of the city and they're out in the county. So we got empty buildings that are falling apart, high needs. I have 2 buildings that were built in the 1920s that we still use. Then in context, I have 2 middle schools that we built. We opened 3 years ago that are state-of-the-art solar buildings that are ranked 3 and 4 in the country for efficiency. So we have both ends of the spectrum. Where we're sitting, they've finished the highway system from Raleigh to the coast. So I'm halfway in the middle, really, really low cost of living. So we have an awful lot of professional people that travel to Raleigh, the Research Triangle Park to work. And they're halfway then to their beach house. So we have a lot of diversity there. Same challenge, we're facing budget cuts. How do we move test scores and support our students? So that's one of the reasons why I came here and one of the reasons I'm challenged. They're finishing up the search in Wake County, which is Raleigh, for a superintendent. They said, well, Dunsmore, if you're going down to Florida, why didn't you apply there? And I said, I didn't want Raleigh. And I didn't. I mean, truly, I love my job where I'm at. I love the people where I'm at. I've put an awful lot of work into developing that team and very proud of what we've accomplished. But I was taught long ago, you follow the path chosen. And my wife and I are looking for our end stop, basically. I got about 10 good years in me to put 80-hour weeks in. And we want to be somewhere that we know we can finish our days. And we were blessed with 3 boys. We grew up doing a lot of things with them. We love to be involved in the community and the schools. We're pretty simple people. I mean, I'm no different than anybody else. I like to wear flip-flops and shorts. And people see me in the grocery store and we get out to events. But I think Duval County presents an opportunity that we can make a difference, because I truly believe the next 10 years in public education, we got a lot of work ahead of us, or we're going to lose public education.
Thank you. Mr. Dunsmore, what types of decisions or responsibilities do you delegate to others, to include employees or outsourcing, and how do you monitor or manage accountability for performance of those who are responsible?
I think accountability and monitoring performance is the key for any role. One of the hardest things for me to learn as I came up through was delegating, giving that authority and trust away. As I came up through the ranks in coaching, in particular at the college level, I could only do so much to train the athletes. They had to go out and do it. And as I've went to larger and larger systems and the staff's increase, I pride myself, and I think my leadership style and the way I work is I put coalitions together. I'll hire the best and the brightest people I can get to put around me. Mike Dunsmore does not have all the answers, but I am by trade a counselor and a listener. I try to involve everybody in those decision-making process and putting plans together and see them through action. With my team, we meet. I believe in training leadership, particularly in education, and I think that goes down to my building levels and how they supervise and monitor their teachers. And we try to do that by example. But I'm a big picture person, so I challenge my staff. I want them to go out and be free and open enough they know they can make mistakes, and they're not going to stop taking those chances or thinking outside the box. But we evaluate ourselves every day. We talk about different things, and we have relationships that we know they can come in to say, hey, Mike, that's not going to work. stop it, or this is good. I do formal evaluations on them each year, and part of that is they give me their plan, what they did good this year, what they did bad, what they needed to work on, and how we're going to fix those things next year. I do one of myself, and we all sit down and talk about those. So I think my role primarily as the leader is to make sure we're attracting, recruiting the best and the brightest we can, whether it be teachers, aides, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, everybody. We want the best we can get here at Duval for our kids.
Mr. Dunsmore, could you please give us an example of how you had to develop a shared vision of a preferred future with the board and key stakeholders, how you implemented it, what the outcomes were, and how would that inform your approach here in Duval County?
So probably the biggest thing that it's easy to point at, and probably like here at Duval, I think you're in your strategic plan through 2020. Ours ends next year. And so again, developing that strategic plan, we went out and did community stakeholder groups. We went to all of our high schools because it was in the feeder patterns, reached out to every group that we could reach out to involve them. We had student committees, teacher committees, and all the work committees involved in that. We brought in a retired superintendent to lead that because I sat in the back and listened and took notes. And then we went back and put that together. We had work sessions with our board and just spent a lot of time of putting things up, and you know, we had a mess on the wall. And then we started narrowing that down, what was most valuable to us. Before we ran it officially through the board, then we went back out to our community stakeholder meetings and basically said, this is what we came up with. This is how we're going to evaluate it. This is where our benchmarks are. And this is what we're going to come back and report on you. Report on to you on how we're doing. So, you know, each year after we've done that, we went back out and reported those. We meet as a board and a committee work session to evaluate how we're doing. We try to get feedback from all our stakeholder committee. But it's one of those things in my role. I sit on a number of boards in the county. I'm on the Chamber of Commerce. I'm on the Workforce Development Board. A lot of my senior level staff are out in community groups. So we're getting our people out there and getting involved in those groups just to ask questions and listen of how we can change, do better, or do worse. Or not do worse, excuse me.
Mr. Dunsmore, my question is, what has been the most difficult decision that you had to make with a governing board? What was your role and the role of the board, and how did you handle the reaction to their decision?
I'll point to one that I shared with the other group. So with these, primarily it's budget cuts. When we get into cutting back on the budget, and oftentimes we don't have a lot of say in that. We try to prioritize students first. But the example I'll give with my board in North Carolina, we have an initiative that's going through over the next 4 years. We're lowering class size in kindergarten, first and second grade. It's a 4-year rollout. They're helping fund that because we're trying to get more of the arts and those soft skill classes back in. My board came back and they wanted to implement it next year. We don't have funding for it next year, and we're facing other budget shortfalls. And I normally like to have my staff up doing a lot of the presentations to the board to help develop them and take credit for the work they do. I did that presentation because it wasn't pretty. And basically, you made a motion, you passed this. Here is why, essentially, we can't do this. It was about a 20-minute presentation and about a 30-minute whooping because they were really upset that we didn't bring them other options. And as the rules go, we were tasked with the initiative. We were to tell them how we were going to do it, which included how much it would cost. We didn't have a whole lot of other options because like here, we're trying to look how we're filling shortfalls, not going out and spending a lot of other money. And so it's been the last couple months, a lot of hard work with our board, trying to get back on track and get focused back on our mission.
Superintendent, my question is about lobbying, state legislation. What role, what different things have you done to lobby state legislators for school funding and also for battling some of those unfunded mandates that you were just talking about?
I guess fortunately or unfortunately, that takes more and more of our time as superintendents, something I take very, very serious. Mainly because I think we've done a really poor job in education of our message. We've allowed the legislative bodies to message for public schools, which they've put up some hurdles and roadblocks and funding cuts that have been devastating. I have my local contingency from our county that I meet with. They come to some of our board meetings. We have joint board meetings that they'll come to. I get them out in my schools, and I think the biggest impact was getting them out to see what we're actually doing. They're told an awful lot of what's going on in our schools, and it's not always accurate. And I shared earlier, I had our state superintendent and two of our legislative bodies that were out visiting schools. And one of our high schools, which was an agricultural school, they were out, they got to see the livestock the kids were raising, and they hadn't seen that before. And yet when they were talking to our students, it was like, yeah, I want to go be a vet. I want to go into agricultural engineering. And they saw the passion of what they were doing through the animals, and they were really thankful of that. I spend an awful lot of time out in Raleigh. Our state school board association has a very strong lobby, and we go out a lot to meet with our people. They're on my email lists. I'm on first name basis with all their staff. But it's very, very important that they understand. Last year we had a $2 million shortfall in low wealth funding. It's one of our funding formulas. And the shortfall was because of our local tax base. They had changed. And there was no way to fix that error because it's a year. It's based on the previous year. Through other work, we were able to get that funding restored. And that was with the help of our legislative body. We're in the same boat again this year, and we're right in the process of working. This year, we're hoping to have a long-term solution fixed for that. I'm also on the military impacted schools. I'm one of the two representatives from North Carolina that go to Washington twice a year. So I have access to our two senators and then all of our House of Representatives, and have developed those relationships over the last few years, and actually have been getting them into our schools when they're in the area. I also do a lot locally. Our county manager and I meet regularly just to talk things and go over. And part of the success we're seeing is the transparency in the budget and what we're doing to bring them out and show them that we are good stewards of your money. So I think developing those personal relationships, getting my staff involved in that, getting our students involved in that. I've taken students with me to Raleigh to present to the legislative body. I'll sit in the back and watch and just let them run with it. And we're moving the needle.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Dunsmore. How do you ensure that we are being fiscally responsible with our financial resources, and how do you communicate that with our board and community stakeholders?
Well, again, I think the transparency issue is we put out a lot of information similar to this stuff on budget and where the monies are going. All of our board meetings are open, and we talk about those different things. Again, with stakeholder meetings, our Chamber of Commerce, we have an educational luncheon twice a year, where myself and some of my staff, and they bring in a lot of community members, similar to this, ask questions of different things of what we're doing, what initiatives we're doing. We talk about funding. They do the similar thing with our legislative body that I'm involved with. And again, I think it's just good communication. and being out and relying on my staff that if we have an initiative at any school, are we doing with that money what we said we're doing? And more importantly, what are the results and how we're evaluating that moving forward?
Mr. Dunsmore, what has been the most unpopular decision you have made to make, and how did you handle the reaction to the decision?
I'm going to give you two on that. The first one, my first board chair had hired me as superintendent. I had to terminate her niece for embezzling money. Terrible decision. It was hard beyond means, but it had to be done. My staff knows, my boards know, I won't lie, cheat, or steal for anything. That's just who I am. I don't accept that. I had to bring her in. I had to terminate her. Her aunt was extremely upset. Made life miserable for me for several weeks. But it taught me, what I found out through that was my staff, my community, everybody knew that I was going to stand up for what was right. And the support followed. And I think in any role that when you have to terminate an employee for whatever reason, it is a very hard job to do. And I try to instill in my principals and everybody, we're in the service industry. We should be doing everything we can for our students, but there's also a business aspect that you're responsible to uphold. And that's part of that job. And I tell people, I'm going to back you. I'm going to support you. I'll take the responsibility for mistakes, but don't put me in a position where I have to make a decision you're not going to like. I'm not going to enjoy it, but it's not going to have the impact it's going to have on you. So I try to lead my troops like that. We're trying to train our principals to do their evaluations and get into that mindset. But anytime we're dealing with people, it's difficult. It has an impact on you.
Mr. Dunsmore, in light of the recent active shooter incident in Parkland, Florida, and the Florida legislature passing the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Safety Act, what would be your vision and strategy to address the short-term and long-term vulnerabilities identified in the district?
So, and I've read through that, and I've talked to some people on that, and I know arming non-law enforcement people is involved in that, and where the funding's at. I have some concerns about arming non-law enforcement until they settle the training. I think like a school teacher, you go through 4 years of college to be able to teach school. Most of our law enforcement people go through extensive training, and I want to make very sure that those people we're arming in those schools understand the role they play and understand what they've been tasked to do, and that they have the proper training. The one thing that's going to be very difficult because of the cost initiatives, I don't think everything can be accomplished overnight. What we've been working on, we're tasked something very similar. We're adding additional SROs where we can. I think like here we have in every high school and every middle school. We didn't have in our elementaries. We're looking how we can increase that and fund it. We have a lot of open campuses. So again, we've been trying as best we can to upgrade our cameras, upgrade our swipe cards and entry and accesses. But the majority of our older buildings, probably like here, were built in the 40s and 50s, particularly the elementaries, are open campuses. And they're very, very difficult to secure. And we probably like here do not have the funds to raise those buildings and build all new buildings. We're also rolling out where we're going to be digitizing all of our blueprint plans of our schools. I have school buildings we don't have plans for, plus different things that they've been in and changed around. So we have a company that's going to come in and do that and put everything. You'll be able to access it off your cell phone. So if there is the teachers, that we're going to have panic buttons that are through the cells, that if there is, say a student passes out, you need EMT, they can hit that. The EMTs, the fire, the ambulance, the police, everybody will have access to that map. We're hoping that's going to help with response. that when they're getting to the schools that they can go right to those spots. There's a lot of different technology you can do out there, but I think the biggest thing that we're really focusing in on is the training with our staff and with our students. We started last summer with our teachers, with our SROs and our law enforcement. They obviously do a lot of active shooter drills, but also getting our teachers to understand the proper things to do, keeping your doors locked, going into the room and locking the doors and running those scenarios. And we've upped those trainings and documenting that training to get people's awareness out there as we move forward and as quickly as we can do all we can to secure our buildings.
We're moving to question 9. We're under halfway, so we're in good shape.
Hi. Okay, my question represents what teachers want to know about your style. So some superintendents prefer teachers to follow provided curriculum, lesson plans, and timelines to ensure that teachers across the board are on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
But other superintendents allow teachers to use district-provided material as a tool, but allow more autonomy with lesson planning as long as all the lessons are guided by the standards. So in your current position, what is your personal philosophy and leadership style with regard to how the provided curriculum is used? Do you prefer district-led timelines and curriculum guides, or do you allow standards-based lessons with autonomy that allow teachers to use the provided curriculum only as a tool?
We want our teachers to be as autonomous as possible. I want them to be creative. I want them to get the gauge of you know your class, you know your student, you know you're at in that scaffolding or timeline. I mean, obviously we have district criteria and state criteria where you have to meet, but I think a blend of allowing the teachers of how they do that and use their skills and expertise and their creativity is what's going to have the best results. You know those students, and let's face it, we all sit in every year those students change. And I don't think there's a set step or you're going to be here, there, because things happen. Like you, we had a hurricane the year before last and everything comes to a standstill. It throws that whole schedule way off. So I, again, like my own staff, I'd like to challenge my teachers. I'd like to see that creativity in the classroom. Like most people, I'd like to see more whole child integrated into the curriculum. I think that's the only way we're ever going to get there. And when I say like the whole child, the soft skills, the arts, the musics, those types of things. And I'll point, if any of you know the program High Tech High out at San Diego, or the MET program up in Providence. And even when I was coming up through school, we took home ec, shop, you went through all those areas. I had to take music class, so I can't play an instrument. They tried. But I think that in order to meet our requirements, we're going to have to figure out ways to integrate that into our standardized curriculums. We know those areas are under attack. It's budget cuts are continuing to loom, but I truly believe, having come up through that and seen that, the more creativity, and that's what our students want. You know, we're not training an industrial workforce, which is our model was based on. And even with the kids I met with today, I mean, the questions they have, it just is incredible of where they're at. And I'm an observer because I'm a counselor by nature. And I'll tell you a story. I was in doing an observation a couple years ago, and I sit in the back of the class and just watching, and there was a young lady, it was an 11th grade biology class. And she was sitting there writing notes, and I kept saw her reaching in her pocket and pulling it out, and she was looking at her cell phone, but she was typing on it. I'm sitting back here going, how's she typing? You know, and so after the class, I said, you're not in trouble. I said, are you right-handed? She said, yes, sir. And I said, can I see your notes? I said, you know, and she showed me, she didn't miss a note. I said, who were you texting? And she got this look of horror on her face. I said, you're not in trouble. I said, I'm curious. If you're right-handed, how are you texting and not looking at your phone? Because I can't text with two thumbs looking at my phone. And she said, I'm working on a project with another girl for English in the next period, and we were just finishing up our notes. Now, I was just blown away. But that's where our kids and where they're going at the multitask. and how they are doing and processing. And to compare what you ask, if we're trying to funnel them into a set way of doing things, we're losing because they're shutting down. That's just not what they want. They want that creativity. I hear far too often if I go into meetings with kids, and I'm notorious, I hate having a cell phone in my pocket. It always rips my pockets. And I'll set things down. Everybody go, oh, that's 1 day suspension. We have to confiscate that. I'm like, what? And they said, well, you know, we're not allowed to Google. We're not allowed to do this. So we've started loosening that up. We allowed the students to have their phones during break times and lunchtime. It's amazing how quiet the cafeteria is when you let them have their phones. And number two, it's amazing how many calls you get from mommy and daddy about data use because we don't let them on our internets. Okay, so we haven't gotten to that. You know, we're working on policies and procedures to get there. And, you know, as well as I do, kids are texting and sending inappropriate stuff. So there's a lot of work there. But I think, again, when I talk soft skills, is teaching students that may not be getting this taught at home how to use that. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And I hear from my business partners and people out in the community, these kids are great researching, but they can't work together and they don't know how to communicate what they research. And again, they're those soft skills. We're not teaching that group work, that communication work, and appropriately how to use technology, because I'm sure most of you know, I mean, I ask my kids, look, I broke something on this, would you please fix it? And they do. They're just light years ahead of where we're at. So I think part of that whole change process is we got to free our teachers up to be as creative as possible.
Okay, Mr. Dunsmore, please describe your experience working with groups in an organization with varying interests and agendas. Describe how you were able to achieve consensus and a common vision for the organization with these different groups.
The real short answer is listen to everybody, give everybody a voice, allow that debate to occur. I mean, my job in those situations is to moderate and keep peace and allow the active debate to go on. But anytime in those groups, it's give or take. And I think everybody has to have something that they can call their own as part of that. And that, again, is just that give and take and working with groups. And everybody has passion about what they're doing and what their interests are. And a good example I can tell you, I have 7 board members now, all passionate about education, but they all got 7 different passions. And as I tell each one of them, they'll come to me and they say, well, you got to do something with so-and-so. They're just not bending an inch on this. Well, you're not bending an inch on this. And I love them all dearly, and they're all very passionate. But bringing that all together, it takes a lot of hard work. And it's something that I have just developed back when, you know, coaching, getting athletes to do things and coming up through with that. But everybody wants to be involved. And I've found the more we get them and give them the voice and listen and try what they're asking, it gets easier every time.
Superintendent, this question has to do with public presence, being a public figure. Tell us about your most demanding public presence experience, what your role was and the role of the board.
Boy, that's easy. So 2 years ago, we had to close the school. It was in one of our high poverty areas in central Goldsboro. We had 3 elementary schools that were maybe 3-4 miles apart, dwindling numbers. Aging buildings, went out, we did the community meetings, we had a lot of ABC plans, everything to go. Went out for the final meetings where we were announcing what we were doing. My board members supported me from the audience. I was up there alone doing an auditorium of real angry people. Believe it or not, a lot of the staff were angry. And most of us are creatures of habits. You know, this was my room. I've always taught here. We had a lot of parents that had multiple children at different buildings that time schedules didn't meet, daycare didn't meet. It was tough. But, we allowed everybody to speak. I think the one night we didn't leave there to go after 10 o'clock. It's hard to stand that long and get yelled at. But again, I felt it was important that everybody had a chance to speak. We ultimately closed that building, but we reopened it as a preschool center. So we're still purposing it. And we're adding preschool classes there next year. The other two elementary buildings we split. We went K1, 2 and made it all literacy focused. So we moved our best and brightest reading teachers over to that building. And most of those students were coming in delayed, high poverty, high need student. And we were really focusing on getting them the literacy foundation. Our 3, 4, 5 students then, we were blessed that we got an Apple Connect Ed grant, one of 97 school buildings in the country that we put in that school. Apple came in and just tricked it out, several $1 million. And it was really neat to see those students when everybody got an iPad and there's an iTV in every room. The teachers got all kinds of stuff, so they quit yelling at me. And so 2 years later, it's working. It was a tough decision. It would have been easier probably, not to do it, but it was the right thing for kids. And what I found is there was a lot of attachment to that school building because aunts, uncles, moms, dad, grandparents went there. And we really focused on what was best for the students. And I think 2 years later, because we did what we said, is why it's working.
One more question. Okay, can you give us an example where you have faced an authentic crisis within an organization? Mm-hmm. What happened, your role in handling it, the results, and most importantly, key things that you learned from that situation?
Yeah, this one, you guys are asking good questions. They right into it. So I was at Goldsboro. We had just started school. And I was sitting in my office, and I got a call. One of my buses ran over a teacher. So my office was about 4 miles from the building. And because I was new there and where I came from, I was a one-man show. And so when there was bus wrecks, I'd always run out and go. And I went and my public information officer was chasing me. He said, hey, and I was over there quick enough. I was on the scene before the EMSs. And I had one of my special ed teachers that was chair-bound, took a different route in, was going up the ramp, hit a stone and came back and fell out of the chair. It was one of our daycare buses ran over him. And it was not a pretty sight. And we had students that saw it. They were on the bus and everything with that. His mother teaches for us. She retired. Where I came from, that was probably the first day I had to face television cameras. And the way I do business in any of those things, anytime you have student deaths, whatever they are, we have an all-call system that we can go out to different schools or the entire county. I put the all-call out of my voice, which was not the normal, to tell them what happened. I faced the TV cameras to tell them what happened. Probably one of the hardest days of my career, one I'll never forget. He was a wonderful teacher. And how I got to know him about 3 weeks before that, his building was right on the side of the base. And most of those children walk through the gate to the elementary school. And we had a bomb scare over at the base. And it was pouring down rain. And the base commander and I were trying to herd kids up and going here and there. And he was one of the last ones out of his building. And he was in his wheelchair, and he had about 10 or 11 kids around him, a big smile on his face. The kids were making sure he was getting out. And, those types of things, and I see the passion of what good things teachers do. It was a tragic, tragic accident. But it has taught me how fragile life is. And I've been through a lot of student deaths, and they all impact me. But that went, at the time, really, really, really deep down. I mean, even to this day, there's probably not a week it doesn't go by, particularly over around that building, and I just don't think of that. His wife was pregnant at the time and had since had a child after he was gone, so it was a pretty tragic day. I learned, because that was the first time I ever had a public information officer, that they like to, I know we have our press people over there that keep a pretty tight leash on the superintendent, and I wasn't used to having a leash on. That I did learn a lot from that, and to value what our teachers are doing. And I know you had asked about morale and some different things, and it's important what the teachers do, and we need to get back to valuing that.
My question is related to staff. How do you establish a team and mobilize team members to achieve goals? Give us an example of a successful project resulting from teamwork.
So with my inner team, as I said earlier, I try to surround myself with my best and brightest people. I was very blessed going into Wayne County that my senior level staff were just absolutely incredible. One of the things the prior administration never did was allow them to run projects. So I get them involved going out doing projects. And as I said earlier, I allow them to take risks and make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. I mean, that's what education's built upon. And I give them that autonomy and that authority to go out and do that. I want them to do those presentations in community meetings and do those presentations in front of the board and other meetings. I'm trying to get all my staff to get more involved in community, whether it be the chamber, whether it be communities and schools. We have pre-K boards that I have folks on. So we develop those teams, and I think that's one of my strengths is bringing all those parts together. And we've accomplished the strategic plan, but as I mentioned earlier, closing a school, and we're in the middle of a huge redistricting process. So about 4 of us are all doing different things, and then we come together every other week, and we have timelines because none of us want to show up to that meeting and not have our piece done. So we challenge each other to make sure we're doing it, and that's our benchmarks and how we motivate each other. And as we're going through that process, because when we started it, we knew it was going to be about a 3-year process. It's not a fun process because nobody wants to move schools or have schools closed, but it had to be done. And we're seeing good results from that because of our openness and our transparency.
Okay. We have high and low socioeconomic students. How would you ensure that every student, regardless of socioeconomic status, receive equal access and resources to ensure high achievement? Please give examples of use of facilities, curriculum design, and community input to achieve equal access.
Well, again, I think every student deserves equal opportunity. One of the challenges we faced is in our vocational programming. We don't have specific vocational programming in every school, and we don't have open enrollment school choice, so a lot of students don't have that. That's one of the things we're working on, bringing it to a central location. But the biggest area on that is ensuring that there's an equity in the budget, that everybody is getting the proper funding to get what they need. Obviously, the curriculum is going to vary some depending on where the schools and where they're at and what the need of the students are. If you have a high population of students that are significantly behind, I mean, we obviously need those supports to try to catch them up. Our value-added data, we look at it in 3-year time shots and try to work. If we know we have a group of students coming up through that is really regressing, that we need to funnel some additional supports there. Title monies is very restricted. The federal monies are very restricted and don't always hit where you need them to hit. So we do try to take a hard look at that. I rely on the principals and a lot of my senior staff to pull all that stuff in. I ask them to prioritize what they want and why they need it, as far as curriculum. Most of those buildings have parent advisory groups that they're involved with and other community groups. So they're meeting at that lower level and then they're bringing it up to the next level. And we try to prioritize where we are in the budget. Like you, we're facing deficits and looking at cuts here or there. One of the areas that we try to put last and hopefully not get to is those things that are directly impacting the students.
Thank you, Mr. Dunsmore. Is there anything else you would like to share with us to support your candidacy?
Wow. Well, first off, I'm very proud and honored to be here in front of you today. Thank you for having me, and I want to thank the Board of Education for naming me a semifinalist. I tell most people I'm not here before you as Mike Dunsmore. I'm here before you as the superintendent of Wayne County Public Schools, because we've done a lot of great things up there, and that's what enabled me to be here. Most of it text or emailed, and shout outs and congratulations. And I think if I am the successful candidate, probably the hardest thing I'm going to have to do is say goodbye to them. And it's tough. I'm at a point in my life where Diane and I are ready for that next step. I've had her move twice. We built a house in Pennsylvania on her family farmland, raised our boys there. When I took the job in North Carolina, it took 8 months to sell the house. 8.5 hours away, she stayed in the house, I went to work. Tough time. We're reunited, spent 6 years there. We moved again to Goldsboro. It was only 2 hours apart, so that one was a little easier, but she's assured me that she's only moving one more time. So, but we're at a point, as I said, I've raised 3 great boys. My youngest is out in Denver. He is a park ranger for the city of Westminster, right above Denver. His girlfriend, soon-to-be fiance, is a orthopedic trauma nurse. Now, he was the smartest of my 3 boys. So he met Bree in college. She graduated #1 in her class in nursing. He came out one day and said, "Bree's going to Denver." I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm following her. What do you think?" Smart decision. They're doing great out there. And as I said, my middle son is a pastry chef, and I'm proud of what he's doing at helping care for one of his classmates. And it's really neat to see your son show that compassion and empathy. And, when we talk about these soft skills and the arts, I mean, he can't, he'll tell me, I can't wear a suit, I can't work a 9-to-5 job. I got to do what I'm doing. And it's the same with my oldest son, very smart. He was a skills, he was an exchange student in Chile his junior year in high school. And I tell a lot of people, part of what has calmed me is raising boys and patching drywall and all the gray hair. But we put Matthew on a plane in August, 1 month before 9/11. So when you're a parent and your son's in Chile, we didn't have these things. You couldn't talk to him. And that was really difficult. But I was fortunate. I went down to visit because I was curious to where he was at. And I got to visit the schools in Chile and see how wonderful the schools in the United States are, and him have that experience. I've been able to visit China and visit schools and see how wonderful it is in the United States. And I truly take to heart that my mission is, over the next however many years that I'll be blessed to do this, is to change that perception of public education. We're doing great things. We have great kids, great staff. They're working hard, but the work's getting harder and harder. And if we don't start valuing those people and taking care of them, we know we're not having as many of our young people going into education. And I'm very competitive. I don't want to lose. I'm going to do everything I can, fighting with legislators and scream and holler as much as I can and involve the community and fighting for our kids. And the only thing I can tell you, if I'm the chosen candidate, I'll be in there every day giving you 300%.
Dr. Dunsmore, thank you.
Thank you.
The timing great. There's a few minutes here. You don't feel compelled. You have to do anything, but if you want to, you could ask the committee some questions.
I really only have one question, and most of you, they were great questions. Thank you. Anytime you make me think and ponder, now I'll go back tonight and lay down, and why didn't I say this? What are one or two things that are the most priority you're looking for? And most of you said some different things that you're looking for in a superintendent. But if there's the one thing you want to tell me coming in the door, look, Mike, make darn sure you do this. I got teachers in the room. This is it. You should all be grabbing that.
I'm going to go ahead and say I'd set this to our last candidate. I don't know the exact statistics, but I know Duval County is really high in teacher turnover. And I've personally seen some really great teachers leave and go to private schools or just quit because of the way we've been treated. So I don't know. I would just, you know, hope that if you came here that you would take our concerns seriously and have a consistent way that we can convey our feelings. Because I'm telling you, currently it feels like all the blame is put on the principals and things that are happening whenever we express discontent, but it's not from the principal. It's come from downtown. And they seem a lot more out of touch with what we're thinking and feeling and our needs and telling us what we have to do, and we really feel like they don't know how to do our job. So that's you know, my biggest concern is you know, restore professionalism and listen to us.
I have something to add too. For me as a parent, I can sum it up in as less testing and more recess. And that goes not just recess, but the arts,
gym class,
arts, music, all those things that end up getting cut when there are budget issues. So that's would be a priority that I would see.
I agree.
I want to add to that, listening to your students also, because they know what's happening in their classrooms and in their schools. And then responding to parents, you know, not ignoring emails. We are very blessed with Dr. Willis right now. She responds back very quickly. She acts very quickly, so very proud of that. But, yeah, listening to students and the teachers, that's very important because they know what's happening in the schools and in the classrooms.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking we're at such an interesting time in education because we're closing the doors, right? And we're thinking about security and making sure that they don't have access in these open campuses. At the same time, we need to promote what's happening inside those schools. So I think perception is something really big in this community. And I think that's something that if you were the one to come on and lead this school district, that would be really, really important. Even just the whole idea of marketing and showing off all these great things that are happening in this community.
Ditto. I think it solves a lot of the challenges we have. People have a more favorable impression of what we're trying to do. You know, the stakeholders, you know, come out of the woodwork to support it. And I think there's a lot to celebrate. We just haven't.
Dr. Dunsmore, thank you very much. I think you've got about 15 minutes to get to the cabinet, and then you're done. And